This is the story of how I found out my perfect wife was a cheap whore for rich clients. She fucked around while I built our family. Hi, my name is Liam, and I don't even know where to start. My life has turned into something out of a bad movie, and I still can't wrap my head around it. My wife, Sarah, and I have been married for 9 years. People always said we looked like the perfect couple, the kind you see on postcards or in ads for home insurance. And honestly, I thought we were solid. Sure, we had our ups and downs, but who doesn't? Sarah has always been the lively one in our relationship, outgoing, charming, the kind of person who could walk into a room full of strangers and leave with a dozen new friends. I admired that about her. Meanwhile, I've always been more of a homebody. I like routines, quiet evenings, and predictability. I thought we balanced each other out. Now, I'm starting to think she saw me as boring. It all started 2 weeks ago. I was cleaning out the guest room because we'd been meaning to turn it into a home office, and it was full of random junk. As I went through a stack of old boxes, I found a leather-bound notebook tucked under a pile of magazines. At first, I thought it was one of Sarah's old planners. She's always been into organizing and writing lists. But when I opened it, I realized it wasn't a planner. It was a journal. Now I know what you're thinking. I should have put it down. A journal is private, right? I even hesitated for a second. But then I thought, we're married. What could she possibly be writing that I can't see? I flipped it open, figuring it'd be filled with harmless stuff like her thoughts about work or grocery lists. I was wrong. The first few pages were innocent enough. She wrote about how excited she was when we bought our house and how much she loved decorating it. But as I read on, the tone changed. There was an entry from about a year ago that caught my attention. In it, she mentioned a coworker named Ryan. She described him as funny, kind, and easy to talk to. She even wrote that she felt alive around him in a way she hadn't felt in years. That made my stomach twist, but I told myself it was probably just harmless admiration. Everyone has people they connect with, right? But then I read further. Sarah wrote about how Ryan made her laugh like I didn't anymore. She said he understood her in ways I couldn't. And then there was this line, Ryan kissed me today. It felt wrong, but also exciting. I don't know what this means for me and Liam. I just sat there staring at the page like it would disappear if I looked long enough. Ryan kissed her, and she didn't stop him? I wanted to close the journal and pretend I hadn't seen it, but something in me kept turning the pages. Over the next few entries, she detailed their growing closeness. Drinks after work, long phone calls, secret coffee dates. She even described how she made up excuses to stay late at the office just to spend time with him. I couldn't believe what I was reading. The worst part wasn't even the cheating. It was the way she wrote about me. She called me routine and predictable. She said I wouldn't understand her need for excitement. One line in particular gutted me. Liam is a good man, but he's not enough anymore. I sat in that room for hours, rereading the entries until my head hurt. I kept trying to convince myself there had to be some kind of misunderstanding. Maybe she was just venting. Maybe Ryan meant nothing, but deep down, I knew better. That night, I couldn't bring myself to confront her. Instead, I decided to watch her more closely. If she was lying to me, I wanted to catch her in the act. Over the next few days, I started noticing little things I'd never paid attention to before. She was always on her phone, smiling at texts she wouldn't let me see. She started working late more often, and when she came home, she barely acknowledged me. I even found a receipt in her purse for a fancy restaurant I knew we hadn't been to together. I didn't confront Sarah that night. Instead, I tried to focus on keeping things normal. Though my mind was anything but calm, I began paying closer attention to her behavior, trying to connect the dots from what I'd read in her journal. It wasn't easy. Every time she smiled at me, every time she laughed at some silly TV show we watched together, I found myself questioning whether it was real or just part of an act. There were little things I might have brushed off before, but now stood out like red flags. Her phone was always glued to her hand, even when she wasn't using it. She started getting more defensive about her work meetings, snapping at me when I casually asked how her day went. And then there were the late nights. Sarah's job had always required occasional overtime, but lately it seemed like she was working late 3 or 4 times a week. She'd leave the house in the morning looking immaculate, dressed like she was walking into a boardroom instead of the marketing department she managed. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to these work commitments than she was letting on. I told myself not to jump to conclusions. After all, I had no concrete proof, just the suspicions stirred up by that journal. But one night, I found something that turned those suspicions into a gut-wrenching certainty. It was a Friday evening, and Sarah had told me she'd be home late because of a team dinner. I was alone in the living room, half watching a basketball game on TV when I decided to tidy up a bit. As I picked up her coat from the armchair to hang it up, something fell out of the pocket. It was a receipt. Normally, I wouldn't have thought twice about it, but something made me stop. The receipt was from a hotel bar downtown, dated just 2 nights earlier. And the part that made my blood run cold, it wasn't for a coffee or a light snack. It was for 2 glasses of wine and an expensive cheese platter. Sarah hadn't mentioned going out that night. In fact, she'd told me she was working late and had come home tired, barely saying 2 words before heading straight to bed. I stared at the receipt for what felt like hours, my mind racing. Who had she been with? Was it Ryan? I tried to calm myself down, telling myself there could be a reasonable explanation. Maybe it was a work meeting, maybe it was with a client. But deep down, I knew better. When Sarah came home later that night, I watched her carefully. She was cheerful, smiling like nothing was wrong, talking about how much fun the dinner had been. I asked her casually, "Where did you guys end up eating?" She paused for a split second before replying, "Oh, just this Italian place near the office. Nothing special." She was lying. I didn't push her. Instead, I decided to play along, acting like everything was fine, but inside, I was already planning my next move. Over the weekend, I combed through the house, looking for more clues. I wasn't proud of myself. It felt invasive, like I was violating her privacy, but I couldn't stop. I had to know the truth. In the back of her closet, tucked behind a pile of old scarves, I found something that made my stomach drop. A small gift bag from an upscale boutique. Inside was a lacy black dress I'd never seen before, still with the tags on. I couldn't help but wonder, who was this for? It certainly wasn't for me. Sarah had never dressed like this for our date nights, and why was she hiding it? That Monday, she left for work as usual, kissing me goodbye like everything was normal. I spent the entire day replaying everything I'd discovered. The journal, the hotel receipt, the dress, and wondering how much longer I could keep up the charade. By the time she came home, I decided to take a different approach. Instead of accusing her outright, I wanted to see if she'd hang herself with her own lies. Over dinner, I casually mentioned an article I'd read about infidelity in marriages. "It's crazy," I said, keeping my tone light. "Apparently, most people who cheat say they feel like their partner just doesn't excite them anymore." Sarah looked up from her plate, her smile faltering for just a moment. "That's depressing," she said, forcing a laugh. "But I guess it happens to people who don't work on their relationship." Her response sounded rehearsed, almost robotic, like she'd practiced it in her head. I let it slide, but I couldn't ignore the way she avoided eye contact for the rest of the meal. That night, as I lay awake next to her, listening to the soft rhythm of her breathing, I felt the weight of everything pressing down on me. I didn't just feel betrayed, I felt humiliated. Here I was lying next to the woman I'd promised to love and cherish, and she was hiding a part of her life from me. I wasn't ready to confront her yet, not without more proof. But the pieces were starting to come together, and I knew it was only a matter of time before the truth came out. The next morning, I woke up feeling hollow, my thoughts tangled in everything I'd uncovered. Sarah's deceit felt like a weight pressing down on my chest, but I wasn't ready to confront her, not yet. I needed to see the full picture. As she left for work, humming a tune and flashing a smile as though nothing was amiss, I found myself staring at her retreating figure, wondering how much of what we had was real and how much was just a facade. Once she was gone, I returned to her office. The space smelled faintly of her perfume, a scent that used to bring me comfort but now felt cloying. My hands trembled as I opened her desk drawers. Most of what I found were harmless items. Work documents, pens, an old planner. But as I sifted through, my fingers brushed against something smooth and unfamiliar. Pulling it out, I found a small black box tucked beneath a pile of folders. My breath caught as I opened it. Inside was a hotel keycard. It was sleek, bearing the name of a luxury hotel downtown. My pulse quickened as I noticed the room number etched neatly on its surface. 17. I stared at it, my thoughts spinning. Why did she have this? Who had she met there? And when? I shoved the keycard back into its hiding spot and sat down heavily in her chair, my mind racing. This wasn't just suspicion anymore. This was evidence. Evidence of something Sarah hadn't told me. But was it what I feared? My imagination ran wild with possibilities, each one worse than the last. When Sarah returned that evening, I acted as if everything was normal. I asked her about her day, nodded along to her stories, and even laughed at one of her jokes, though it felt like my throat was closing with every word. She didn't seem to notice my tension, or if she did, she didn't let on. As we sat across from each other at dinner, I studied her face, searching for any cracks in her calm exterior. She looked the same as she always had, but now I couldn't shake the feeling that I didn't truly know the person sitting in front of me. The next day, I found myself driving downtown, the hotel keycard weighing heavily in my pocket. I wasn't sure what I was hoping to find, answers maybe, or some kind of closure. The hotel loomed large and imposing as I pulled into the parking lot. It was the kind of place people went for special occasions, not something casual or unplanned. I hesitated before stepping inside, taking a deep breath to steady myself. The lobby was stunning, with polished marble floors and crystal chandeliers casting soft light over the space. I approached the front desk, my heart hammering in my chest. The woman behind the counter greeted me with a professional smile, but I could barely return it. My voice was steady, though, as I asked, "Can you tell me if room 714 is currently occupied?" She hesitated, her smile faltering slightly. "I'm sorry, sir, but I can't give out that information. It's against hotel policy." I forced a polite laugh. "Of course, I didn't mean to pry. It's just that my wife left her things in the room, and I wanted to make sure I wasn't interrupting anyone if I went to grab them." Her expression softened. "Ah, I see. Well, as long as you have the key card, you're welcome to access the room. Let me know if you need anything else. I thanked her, feeling a mix of relief and dread as I walked toward the elevator. The ride up was excruciatingly slow, each ding of the passing floors tightening the knot in my stomach. When I finally reached the seventh floor, I stepped into the hallway, my footsteps echoing on the plush carpet. Room 714 was just a few doors down. I stood in front of it, the key card in my hand, debating whether I really wanted to know what was on the other side. Taking a deep breath, I slid the card into the reader. The light turned green and the lock clicked open. I pushed the door slowly, peering inside. At first glance, the room seemed ordinary, tidy, with the bed neatly made and a vase of fresh flowers on the table near the window. But as I stepped further in, I noticed a faint smell, something floral and unfamiliar. It wasn't Sarah's usual scent. When I got home, the house felt colder than usual, though the temperature hadn't changed. Sarah was in the kitchen, her back to me as she hummed a tune and chopped vegetables. She glanced over her shoulder when I entered, flashing me a warm smile that nearly knocked the air out of my lungs. How could she act so normal, so casual, when everything about her screamed deception? "How was your day?" she asked, her tone light and cheerful. "Fine," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Busy." "Same here, meetings all day. You know how it is." She turned back to the cutting board, completely at ease. I couldn't help but watch her, trying to reconcile the image of this domestic, cheerful wife with the latex and leather I'd found just hours ago. The contrast was so stark, it was almost absurd. I wanted to confront her then and there, to demand answers, but I knew better. Sarah was sharp, too sharp. If I tipped my hand too soon, she'd find a way to twist things, to make me doubt what I'd seen. No, I needed to be smart about this. I needed more. Over the next few days, I started keeping track of her every move. It felt wrong, like I was crossing a line I couldn't uncross, but I couldn't stop myself. I checked her phone whenever she left it unattended, though she rarely did. I watched her closely during dinner, paying attention to every pause, every flicker of hesitation. I even followed her one evening when she said she was meeting a friend for drinks. She didn't go to the bar she'd mentioned. Instead, she drove downtown, parking a few blocks away from the hotel where I'd found the key card. My stomach churned as I watched her get out of the car, dressed to perfection in a way that felt painfully deliberate. She walked briskly, her heels clicking against the pavement, and disappeared into the hotel lobby. I waited for almost an hour, my mind racing with possibilities, each one darker than the last. When she finally emerged, she wasn't alone. A man followed her out, tall and well-dressed, with an air of confidence that made my blood boil. He placed a hand on her back, guiding her toward the car, and they exchanged a laugh that felt far too intimate. I stayed far enough behind to avoid being seen, snapping photos with my phone as they got into her car and drove off. I followed them to a secluded restaurant on the outskirts of town, the kind of place where no one would recognize them. They sat at a table near the back, leaning in close as they talked. Her smile was radiant, her laugh unguarded, and it hit me like a punch to the gut. She'd never looked at me that way, not in years. After they left the restaurant, I followed them back to the hotel. This time, they didn't even bother hiding it. They walked in together, hand in hand, disappearing into the elevator without a second glance. I waited in the car, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. Every part of me wanted to storm inside, to demand an explanation, but I held back. I needed to know exactly what I was dealing with before I made my move. When Sarah came home later that night, she was all smiles. She kissed me on the cheek, told me she'd had a great time catching up with her friend, and headed straight to the shower. I watched her go, feeling a mixture of rage and despair. She didn't even look guilty. If anything, she seemed happier than she'd been in weeks. The next morning, I decided it was time to push back. Over breakfast, I casually asked, "How was your night out?" "It was nice," she said, buttering her toast. "We went to that little wine bar downtown. You'd love it. Very cozy." I nodded, pretending to believe her. "You should take me there sometime." She hesitated for just a second, her knife stilling against the toast. "Sure," she said with a smile. "Maybe next weekend." I wanted to scream, to throw the photos on the table, and demand the truth, but I stayed quiet. If she thought I was buying her lies, she'd slip up eventually, and when she did, I'd be ready. As the days went on, I felt the weight of the secret pressing down on me. I didn't just want to know the truth I needed to know, but the more I uncovered, the more I realized that this wasn't just about infidelity, it was about something much darker, something I wasn't sure I was ready to face. The following weekend, I finally got my chance. Sarah told me she had plans with her friends again, another night out that I knew was anything but innocent. This time, I wasn't going to sit in the car and watch from a distance. I needed answers, and I was willing to do whatever it took to get them. She left the house around 7 p.m., dressed impeccably in a fitted red dress and heels that clicked sharply against the hardwood floor. She kissed me on the cheek before heading out, her lipstick leaving a faint mark on my skin. The gesture felt hollow, like she was playing a role. "Don't wait up," she said with a playful grin as she grabbed her purse and walked out the door. As soon as she was gone, I sprang into action. I knew where she was going, and this time, I wasn't going to rely on distant observation. I followed her car from a safe distance, watching as she drove downtown and parked in the same spot near the hotel. My heart pounded as I saw her step out and check her phone before walking inside. I waited a few minutes, giving her time to settle in, then got out of my car and followed her into the lobby. The staff barely glanced at me as I walked past the front desk, heading straight for the elevators. I didn't know what I was going to find, but I'd come too far to turn back now. The ride up to the 7th floor was nerve-wracking, every ding of the elevator making my chest tighten. When the doors opened, I stepped into the hallway and started walking toward room 714. My footsteps felt deafening against the plush carpet, and my hands were clammy as I approached the door. I raised my hand to knock, but froze when I heard voices inside. A man's laughter rang out, deep and smooth, followed by Sarah's unmistakable giggle. My stomach churned as I leaned closer to the door, straining to hear. Their conversation was muffled, but the tone was intimate, familiar. I couldn't stand it any longer. I knocked firmly, my heart racing as I waited for someone to answer. There was a pause, then the sound of footsteps approaching the door. When it opened, I was face to face with a man I'd never seen before. He was tall, well-groomed, and reeked of confidence. He looked surprised for a moment, but quickly composed himself, leaning casually against the doorframe. "Can I help you?" he asked, his tone calm and unbothered. My eyes darted past him, searching for Sarah. She appeared a second later, her expression shifting from confusion to shock as she saw me standing there. She was still wearing the red dress, but her hair was slightly mussed and her lipstick smudged. "Liam?" she stammered, her voice faltering. "What are you doing here?" I didn't answer right away, my gaze flicking between her and the man beside her. The room behind them was dimly lit, but I could see enough to make my blood boil. The bed was unmade, and on the nightstand sat a bottle of wine and 2 empty glasses. A black duffel bag lay open on the floor, its contents spilling out. A mix of clothing, ropes, and other items I didn't want to think about. "I think the better question is what you're doing here," I said, my voice cold and steady, despite the rage simmering beneath the surface. Sarah opened her mouth to speak but seemed to falter, her eyes darting to the man as though searching for guidance. He stepped forward slightly, his posture protective, almost territorial. "Look, I think you should leave," he said, his tone firm, but not aggressive. "This isn't the place for a domestic argument." I let out a bitter laugh, shaking my head. "A domestic argument? Is that what you think this is?" I turned my gaze back to Sarah, who was now pale and visibly nervous. "I want the truth, Sarah. No more lies." She swallowed hard, her hands fidgeting at her sides. "Liam, it's not what it looks like." "Not what it looks like," I snapped, my voice rising. "Do you honestly think I'm stupid enough to believe that? You've been lying to me for weeks, months even, and now I catch you here. With him?" The man stepped forward again, but I held up a hand to stop him. "Don't. You don't get to say anything. This is between me and my wife." Sarah's eyes filled with tears, and for a moment, I thought I saw regret in her expression. But then, she straightened her back, her chin lifting slightly as though bracing herself for a blow. "You're right, I've been lying," she said, her voice trembling. "But it's not because I don't love you, Liam. I just didn't know how to tell you the truth." "What truth?" I demanded, my frustration boiling over. "What could possibly justify this?" I gestured to the man, the room, and the damning evidence of her betrayal scattered around us. Her gaze flicked to the man, and he gave her a subtle nod, as if granting her permission. She took a shaky breath before speaking, her words cutting through the silence like a knife. "This isn't what you think. It's not some romantic affair. This is business." "Business?" I repeated, incredulous. "What the hell does that mean?" Sarah hesitated, her hands fidgeting at her sides. "Liam, I've been working as an escort for high-profile clients." The air seemed to leave the room all at once. I stared at her, waiting for her to laugh, to tell me it was some kind of cruel joke. But the expression on her face was deadly serious. My mind raced, trying to process what she'd just said. "An escort?" I repeated, my voice barely above a whisper. "Are you kidding me? It's not like that," she said quickly, her words tumbling out in a rush. "It's not about sex, not usually. It's companionship, appearances, conversations. People like him," she nodded toward the man, "pay for someone to accompany them to events or meetings. It's strictly professional." I glanced at the man, who was watching me with an unreadable expression, his arms crossed casually over his chest. He didn't look like someone who needed to pay for company. "You expect me to believe this is just professional?" I asked, my voice laced with disbelief. "In a hotel room with that?" I gestured toward the duffel bag and its incriminating contents. Her cheeks flushed, and for the first time, her confidence seemed to waver. "Sometimes the line gets blurry," she admitted, her voice barely audible. "But I swear to you, Liam, it's not what you think. This is about money, about survival." "Survival?" I snapped, my anger flaring. "We're not struggling, Sarah. We have a house. Stable jobs. What the hell do you mean, survival?" She looked down, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. It's not about us. It's about me, she said quietly. About feeling like I'm worth something, like I'm not just fading into the background. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I opened my mouth to respond but couldn't find the words. My wife, the woman I thought I knew better than anyone, had been living a double life, selling an image of herself to strangers while keeping me completely in the dark. And for what? Validation? Excitement? You should have told me, I said finally, my voice breaking under the weight of everything I was feeling. You should have trusted me enough to tell me. I couldn't, she whispered, tears streaming down her face now. I didn't want you to look at me the way you're looking at me right now. I stood there, torn between anger, betrayal, and an overwhelming sense of loss. The woman in front of me was still my wife, but in that moment, she felt like a stranger. I need some time, I said, my voice hollow. Without waiting for her response, I turned and walked out of the room, the weight of her confession pressing down on me with every step. He'd drive home was a blur, my hands gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. Her words played over and over in my mind. It's not what you think. It's business. It's professional. But the scene in that hotel room, the man's smug confidence, the items in the duffel bag, all of it painted a much darker picture. No amount of carefully chosen words could erase what I'd seen with my own eyes. Deep down, I already knew the truth. She wasn't selling companionship or appearances. She was selling herself. When I got home, I paced the living room, every rational part of me trying to make sense of what I just learned. But no matter how I spun it, no matter how much I wanted to believe her excuses, the facts didn't add up. If it was just about appearances, why the secrecy? Why the lies? And why had she gone to such lengths to hide it from me, if she truly believed it wasn't wrong? As the hours passed, my anger began to bubble over. I couldn't let this sit anymore. I needed answers, not more half-truths. When Sarah finally came home that night, the sound of the door closing behind her sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. She hesitated when she saw me standing in the living room, her eyes wide and wary. You're still up, she said softly, setting her purse on the counter. Her voice was cautious, like she was testing the waters. Why wouldn't I be? I said, and my tone sharper than I intended. After everything you told me today, how could I just go to bed and pretend everything's fine? She sighed, running a hand through her hair. Liam, I told you the truth. I don't know what else you want from me. The truth? I repeated, my voice rising. Sarah, you didn't tell me the truth. You told me a carefully crafted story, a lie wrapped up in just enough truth to keep me off your back. But I'm done playing along. So let's try this again. How long have you been doing this? And don't you dare say it's just business. Her face went pale, and for the first time, I saw real fear in her eyes. I don't know what you mean, she stammered, but her voice lacked conviction. You know exactly what I mean, I snapped, stepping closer. The hotel rooms, the men, the late nights. You weren't just keeping me in the dark. You were selling yourself, Sarah, for money. So stop lying to me and just admit it. She opened her mouth to protest, but no words came out. Instead, she turned away, her shoulders slumping as though the weight of her secret had finally crushed her. Fine, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. You're right. I've been sleeping with them. It's not just companionship, it's everything. The air seemed to leave the room, and for a moment, all I could hear was the pounding of my own heart. I stared at her, waiting for an explanation, an apology, something to make this betrayal hurt less. But all she gave me was silence. How long? I asked, my voice cold and distant. She hesitated, then said, about a year. A year? 12 months of lies, of sneaking around, of pretending everything was fine, while she lived a double life. The thought made my stomach turn. Why, Sarah? I asked, my voice cracking. Why would you do this? Was I not enough for you? Her head snapped up, and for the first time, I saw a flash of anger in her eyes. Don't make this about you, she said sharply. This was never about you, Liam. This was about me, about what I needed. What you needed, I repeated, incredulous. You had a husband who loved you, a stable life, a home. What more could you possibly need? I needed to feel alive, she said, her voice trembling. I needed to feel desired, powerful, like I wasn't just fading into the background. And yes, the money helped too. It gave me freedom, choices, and things I didn't think I could have anymore. Her words hit me like a slap, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. You had all of that, I said quietly. You had me, and you threw it all away for this? She looked away, tears streaming down her face, but she didn't deny it. That was the moment I realized there was nothing left to save. Sarah hadn't just betrayed me. She'd chosen this life, knowing full well what it would cost. And no matter what excuses she gave, the truth was clear. She didn't value me, our marriage, or the life we'd built together. I can't do this anymore, I said, my voice hollow. I won't. Liam, please. No, I said firmly, cutting her off. You made your choice, Sarah, and now I'm making mine. I turned and walked out of the house, leaving her standing there in the wreckage of what we used to be. As I drove away, I felt a strange mix of pain and relief. The life I thought I had was gone, but at least now I knew the truth, and no matter how much it hurt, I knew I'd never look back. A quick update. Since many of you asked how it ended, well, after that conversation, I did what I should have done a long time ago. The very next day, I contacted a lawyer and began preparing the divorce papers. I didn't give her a chance to talk her way out of it, no emotional scenes or attempts to salvage something that had died a long time ago. I packed my things, leaving behind only the stuff I didn't care about, and took nearly all the assets I was legally entitled to: the house, the accounts, and even the car I'd bought for her but was still under my name. I was pragmatic to the core. I abandoned any idea of fairness and simply took what was rightfully mine. She tried to stop me. There were tearful speeches and promises that everything would change, that she had done this for us. But I had seen too much and endured too much. I no longer saw someone I could trust, just a stranger who had made her choice and lost. When all the papers were signed and the property divided, I met her one last time to return the keys to the house she no longer owned. I looked her in the eye and said just one thing: we're done. Forever. Since then, I've never spoken to her again. And you know what? The further I get from that time, the easier it is to breathe. It was painful, destructive, but I feel like I've been set free. I've started a new chapter. So yes, I said goodbye to her for good. She's part of the past now, and finally I'm living again.